Welcome back, everyone. I am psyched this morning because not only is the weather fantastic here in Michigan, but today we're going somewhere I've always wanted to visit and never thought I'd make it to. Welcome to the Henry Ford, better known as Greenfield Village. This is probably the #1 place people have recommended I go in the United States, and I am extremely pleased to finally step inside. It is comprised of nearly 100 historic buildings, uncountable amounts of historic artifacts, machines, there are historic vehicles you can ride on, including the grand locomotives. In another decade or so, it'll be 100 years old and was a direct, unarguable influence on Walt Disney's Disneyland. I am very excited to look around here. So excited, in fact, I don't know where to start. But if we're even going to begin to understand Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford, we're gonna have to know something about Henry Ford himself. The man who brought the automobile to America, who is responsible for so much technological progress in the 20th century, was actually born into life as a farm boy during the Civil War. Although born into a world of horses and buggies, the young farm boy Henry Ford was obsessed with the newfangled machinery of the burgeoning industrial age. When young Henry turned 13, he was given a watch as a birthday present, I believe, and right away, much to his parents' dismay, I imagine, began to pull it apart, but then figured out how to perfectly reassemble the watch in good working order. 3 years later, still obsessed with machines, Henry Ford left the farm and walked to Detroit, where he got a job, of all things, working at a boat company where he learned all about engines and machinery. After returning to the farm for a little while and getting married and seemingly settling down, Henry Ford decided he just had to be in the technology game, and so in 1891 he left the farm permanently, getting a job in 1891 at the Edison Illuminating Company. And there was no better place for a young tinkerer to work than for Edison, of course, who was right on the cutting edge of technology. He became obsessed with gasoline engines and early automobiles, and in 1896, in a shed behind his house, with help from his nerdy co-workers from Edison, successfully test drove his first car, the Quadricycle, built out of 2 bikes and, of course, a gasoline-powered internal combustion engine. Eventually, of course, this would lead to the creation of the Ford Motor Company. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, so let's pause Henry Ford's story there and head back to the farm. This is the actual home Henry Ford was born in and raised in, and was the original genesis for Greenfield Village. This is the first building Henry Ford purchased when he found out his former home was going to be demolished for a road widening project. It's the building that started his building collecting craze, and once he had moved it and reassembled it here, of course, he restored the inside of his mother's house to exactly the way he remembered it, having his Ford employees scour the countryside for exact pieces of furniture and other accoutrements that he remembered from the house. Wow, this is pretty wild. This would be like buying my grandma's old house in Anaheim and finding every piece of furniture they used to have inside and then opening it up to the public. Only nobody would go to my grandma's house. Look at this place.
And so I call this a country home with a city attitude, but it's still a farm home. And I was able to...
Henry Ford's dad must have been a pretty successful farmer, because this is a pretty nice and pretty roomy house in here. It's over 2,000 square feet, which makes it bigger than the house that I rent. And they owned this place. And not just this place, but, of course, the farm and its accompanying barn, which is located just like it was back on the farm, right across the street from the house. This is Henry Ford's father, William Ford's original barn. And judging from the fact that Henry Ford spent the rest of his entire life building machines and advancing technology to make farmers' lives in particular much easier, tractors and such like, part of him must have hated working in this place. But of course, his dad did actually build this barn, so there was a little nostalgia mixed in there, enough to preserve his dad's original barn and his dad's original farm horse. Anyway, to quickly go back to our original tale, Henry Ford's first automobile company was not a success. He simply couldn't build the cars fast enough to be profitable, so he dissolved the company and instead started building one-of-a-kind automobile racers. So you can see Ford racing goes all the way back to Henry Ford himself. Anyway, with the notoriety from building his racers, Ford got new financial backers and officially started the Ford Motor Company, the same Ford Motor Company that still operates today and built my Mustang. Now this is a replica of the original building. It's only a quarter of the size because, as you can imagine, you need a pretty substantially sized building to assemble automobiles inside. The original Ford automobile was called the Model A, not the one from the 1930s. This is way back in the 1900s, and it sold well enough for them to continue and keep making cars like the Model B, etc., etc. But these started to follow the trend of all the other auto manufacturers. They were all sort of luxury vehicles. And Henry Ford, having come from the salt of the earth farm folk, was obsessed with finding a vehicle for the common man, and thus created the Model T that was so successful that they could not keep up with demand. They could only build 25 cars a day. Their factory was completely swamped. They had to stop taking orders, and that's when Henry Ford came up with his finest invention, the moving assembly or production line. A revolution in mass production where the automobiles remained in continuous motion as they were assembled sequentially, allowing them at first to double their speed to only 6 hours per car, and eventually shortening down the process so much that a Model T could be produced start to finish in about 93 minutes. That's about an hour and a half or a movie length. Being so much faster to produce also meant that the cars were much cheaper to produce and much more affordable. The Model T was sold in unbelievable numbers, making Henry Ford a multi-millionaire and the Ford Motor Company the most successful automobile manufacturer in the world. In under 20 years, Ford produced 15 million Model Ts before ending the line. The famous 15 millionth of which is right here on display in the Ford Motor Company at Greenfield Village. Now, if I'm not mistaken, part of the significance of the 15 millionth Model T is that it was the last one. But if you're craving Model Ts, don't worry. Some of those other 15 million are still right here in Greenfield Village, where if you purchase a $10 ticket to ride, you too can ride around in Henry Ford's amazing Model T automobile. The line is a little bit long at the moment, with good reason. It's pretty awesome, so I might do that later. But now that I've told you briefly the story of Henry Ford and his great success, I am really itching to explore more of the village itself, which contains so many old-timey buildings meant to recreate the America of the past. But even more importantly and excitingly, other buildings of supreme historical importance, like these two here, the Wright Brothers' old original family home and their bicycle shop from Dayton, Ohio, where they actually assembled in this building the famous Wright Flyer, that original first flight plane that they shipped in sections to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina for that famous flight in 1903. It's pretty incredible that the first powered flight airplane was built in this place. And it is no coincidence that Henry Ford and the Wright brothers both messed around with bicycles. That was the most accessible machine of the age, and it was very high tech at the turn of the last century. Bicycles were a craze sweeping the nation and the world. In fact, as we talked about in our Route 66 series a couple years back, it was partially because of bicycles that you had the first paved roads built in America and the good road associations. Through the Ford Quadricycle connection, you have the first mass-produced automobile. And right here inside of this bicycle shop, two bicycle-crazed brothers came up with the machine that allowed man to fly. And only 60-something years later, within one person's lifetime, put a man on the moon. Think of that. That was so incredible to see the inside of that place. A very friendly gentleman in there talking about bikes with me. And now I totally have to check out the inside of the Wright brothers' home. This is the house they lived in while they were developing that first flight plane. And it's a beautiful home. This looks like it could be Allie's dream home or something. She loves these big old-fashioned shaded porches. All right, let's step inside. This is pretty amazing because normally to see people's historic homes like this, you'd have to travel around quite a bit. You know, go to the actual place the building was from and find it, park, go inside, maybe pay an admission fee. If, of course, the site survived at all. Otherwise, you'd just be looking at a plaque. Here at Greenfield Village, they've not only preserved these buildings, but brought them together where you can see a whole bunch of them in one place. For most people, traveling is not necessarily a priority, and when traveling, historical sites might not necessarily be a priority. But Henry Ford was committed to the idea of education and people learning about the past, being inspired to create the technology of the future. So by building this place, by bringing these buildings here in one place together, you allow families, particularly local families, that don't have much money, to come to one place and see all of these historic sites together. And they're not all just the homes of people involved in transportation technology. This old-timey looking house behind me is known as the Heinz House, where H.J. Heinz, as all young men do, spent most of his free time in the basement here making and bottling horseradish, which he sold to neighbors in his hometown of Sharpsburg, Pennsylvania. That's right, he started with horseradish, not ketchup. Although when I think of Heinz today, I certainly think of ketchup, particularly that delicious jalapeno ketchup. Oh, anyway, these are just a few of the historic buildings here. And as you can see, these were all packed into one small area. We haven't even begun to see the whole property yet. And each one of these buildings has an incredible story. Many of them have artifacts inside, but I'll try to pick up the pace here a little bit because there's also an epically huge museum on the property I'd like to see a little bit of. I'm telling you, this freaking place is amazing. It's already blowing me away. It's a lot bigger and more spaced out than I imagined. Ooh, now we're getting into some more important inventor history, because right here is old Thomas Edison himself sitting in front of a replica of his famous Menlo Park laboratory. I believe this replica was built using some elements of the original laboratory. Don't forget that not only was Thomas Edison the inventor of the incandescent light bulb, he was also one of Henry Ford's first employers, remember? And a big-time personal inspiration for him. Now, as far as historical figures go, I actually don't know that much about Edison the man. More than you learn in school, but not by much. Tesla fans, of course, don't like him, but Thomas Edison was the man, in fact, who brought the electric light to the world, even though I believe there were 21 other inventors before him who had come up with working light bulbs. He developed direct current, the phonograph, which means all modern recording really stems back to Edison. He doesn't mean to brag, but he was kind of a big deal. And what he didn't invent, his employees seemed to invent for him. That was the other thing. Like Walt Disney employing all those amazing artists, Thomas Edison employed all the up-and-coming young inventors and set up massive laboratories like this one where they could conduct and perfect their experiments.
This is where Edison worked himself at that little desk over in the corner. That's his actual desk, not a recreation. He was sitting at that desk when he invented the first machine that could record and play back sound, the tinfoil phonograph. The great-great-granddaddy of our iPods and MP3 players was invented right over there. Sitting at that desk, Edison and his men perfected the electric light bulb. We know there's still a lot of people who think Edison invented the light bulb. 20 other inventors, 21 guys total, in that 40-year time frame, tried to make the thing work, but nobody could get that filament to last more than moments once the current hit. Edison and his men tried over 2,000 experiments on their light bulb. 2,000 times that didn't work before they got one that did. True story, at about 800 unsuccessful tries, a newspaper reporter came to Thomas Edison and said, "Mr. Edison, don't you see you failed? People have been trying for over 40 years to get that thing to work. You and your guys have tried over 800 times. It doesn't work. You failed." Edison's response, "I have not failed. I found 800 ways that don't work. I just haven't found the way that does yet." He never quit, and as a result, we have electric lights today.
Electric light and power, the phonograph, recorded music and sound, obviously moving pictures. Edison was involved in everything that we take for granted now. It's no wonder that he has so many fans over here. This Menlo Park area is very popular. Now, I like to keep positive, but I gotta tell you, honestly, I hate living in the era of deconstruction. Today, there's more emphasis on Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb. He screwed over Tesla somehow. Or Henry Ford believed bad things between the world wars. Mass production led to mass pollution. But we forget that a lot of these guys' inventions literally saved millions and allowed billions to live. And relative to all of the human past, ease and comfort, and that none of the negative deconstructionists would have had the time or the luxury to go back through history and pick apart these giants without standing on their shoulders and living a lifestyle only possible because of their inventions and achievements. I'm not talking about looking into history and revisiting it or reassessing things or bringing to light things people didn't know that might have been negative or buried in the past. I'm talking about doing that so much, placing so much emphasis on that. But in a lot of popular media and even in a lot of schools nowadays, there's so much emphasis on why these guys suck and very little emphasis on why these great men became great in the first place. It's very bizarre. I mean, we've gone in 2 or 3 generations from people living on farms with no indoor plumbing or toilets to the automobile, the airplane, antibiotics, the rocket ship. And it's just frustrating when people give me grief for looking up to historical figures because they were somehow flawed in this way or that way. Because I've got news for them. We're all flawed. You have to choose to be inspired by the greatness and not by the flaws. And Henry Ford, as you'll no doubt learn if you really look into it, was a deeply flawed man, particularly at certain points in his life. But setting up this place, man, I can certainly admire that. Look at the village green here. This is incredible. Walt Disney was big time inspired by this town set up over here. Not only did it partially inspire the idea for Main Street, USA at Disneyland, but also several uncompleted projects in Walt's lifetime, like Liberty Street, a version of which later became Liberty Square at Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, and an even bigger unfinished project, one that he never realized, where he had hoped to build something very similar to this in his hometown of Marceline, Missouri, and preserve his own father's home and barn. Now, after bringing the automobile to the masses and helping to invent mass production, Henry Ford started to think, what can't I do? He got involved in all kinds of crazy projects, everything from airlines to schools and education. And in fact, originally, this place was meant to be sort of part of his schools and education projects, stuff like that, but continued public interest eventually led to this place being open to the public all the way back in 1933, unless I'm remembering wrong, making this themed historical park, if you will, the granddaddy of all other historically themed theme parks in this country. I'm getting annoyed now because there's no way to see all of this in one visit in one day, and especially not to record it all and share it with you guys. So I'm going to quickly speed up and share just a couple more historic buildings with you. You've got the Scotch Settlement School here, which Henry Ford attended as a youngster. This amazing old courthouse from Logan County, Illinois, where Abraham Lincoln practiced inside as a lawyer. A replica of George Washington Carver's cabin, the birthplace of William Holmes McGuffey, and his schoolhouse. He's, of course, famous for the McGuffey's Readers, which many children, including Henry Ford, learned to read using. Henry Ford's favorite teacher's house, many that I'm not familiar with, like this says George Matthew Adams, or the Charles Steinmetz cabin. There's the Maddox family home over here. Slave quarters from a Georgia plantation moved here because, of course, it was a big part of American history. Wouldn't want to forget. There's just so much here to learn about and see and think about. And I mean, it just goes on and on. The property feels completely endless. Got Luther Burbank's birthplace. He was the creator of the Idaho potato, I believe. I'm not completely ignorant, apparently. This thing called the Swiss Chalet. All right. I feel like this whole section would be much more fun to tour by Model T. I'm starting to accept that there are a whole bunch of historic homes I'm not even going to see today, so they'll have to wait for a future visit, but you get the point. There's a lot to see here. Like, look at this absolutely breathtaking covered bridge. That is totally beautiful. Never cared about them that much in Grandma's old calendar pictures and stuff, you know? But now that I've seen one or two in person, I totally get the attraction. Oh man, next time I come out here, I've got to get a train ride. This covered bridge comes from Pennsylvania and it was built in 1832. Pretty awesome, man. Pretty awesome. Okay, this is gut-wrenching for me. Soul-crushing, because I'm sort of a completionist. I don't like it to quit, you know? Especially when it comes to history. I want to see it all, but I'm going to have to make my way out of the village now if I'm going to see the museum at all. And leave the carriage, bus, Model T, train, and yes, even carousel rides for my next visit. There are tons of shops and confectionaries here I didn't even get a good look at. Don't worry, all those years I've been avoiding this place because I knew I'd get sucked in are over. I definitely can't wait to get back here. Especially to get my Model T ride, for crying out loud. Somebody give me a ride in a Model T! All right, I have now left the village behind. And over here at this replica of Independence Hall, I'm about to enter the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation. If I had known how awesome the village was and how epic this place was, I would have planned it better. I would have been here for 2 days. Not only is there the village with all the rides and whatnot, and this epic museum, you'll see, but they also offer River Rouge factory tours. That's Henry Ford's old giant factory. Ah, Mamma Mia, what don't they got over here? You know, thanks to growing up near Knott's Berry Farm, I'm very familiar with Independence Hall, even if I hadn't visited the real thing, this would feel very familiar to me. This is so weird. I'm expecting to turn the corner and see that shop inside the Knott's replica. But instead of that, or exiting out to a duck pond, we are entering the museum. And oh my Henry, what a place. I don't even know where to get started, but since it is a Ford museum, might as well start with this one. The exhibit called Driving America. Whoa, I'm already seeing a 59 Cadillac Eldorado and a modern self-driving Chevy. Chevy? This isn't Henry Chevy's museum. A beautiful old bullet-nosed Studebaker under some epic neon signs. Those of you who know me know I love the American road. So this is a perfect exhibit for me. Look at this old stagecoach. I love this. It says choices before cars, and the first thing you see is walking. No, people walked? We got the old saddle for horseback riding. We've got the bicycle, and then look at this, the streetcar. That is a beautiful little old streetcar. Then moving forward in history, you have the Amish, apparently. And then on to the first horseless carriages. And honestly, that's just what the first cars looked like. They all looked like something that was just as likely to be pulled by a horse than driven by an engine. This is the quadricycle that Henry Ford invented. Basically, a lot of bicycle parts from two different bikes and a little seat there. That looks fun to ride around in. And then look at all these old automobiles dating all the way back to the 1890s. These horseless carriages here. I mean, the headlights still look like carriage lights. Still a lot of wood in their construction. Many of them were steered with little rudder-like devices. Some of them were things of beauty. See, this is the way automobiles were going when Henry Ford invented the Model T. Rather than going bigger and heavier and bigger and heavier and more luxurious, he had always tried to make these little cars like the Model N right there, and eventually came up with the car that could be transformed from everything to luxurious to a high-clearance little farm vehicle, open carriage, enclosed carriage, truck, coupe, the versatile, the affordable, the popular Model T. See, the Model T met the demand for automobiles in America. It flooded the market, basically. Then, of course, a Chevrolet and Plymouth and all those other automakers started revving up. They began satisfying the demand for luxury, for difference, for style. And it took Ford quite a long time to adapt and retool, eventually re-entering the market with their Model A, the modern one. And from there, of course, and on and on and on, the possibilities and the choices became endless. Now, we are in Dearborn, right on the edge of Detroit, so I've heard a lot of people in here like, my dad designed these, my grandpa worked on these. Which is pretty interesting. Here's Ford's original Model A, and one of his first gas-powered engines that he showed off to his wife while she was trying to cook Christmas dinner. He clamped it to the kitchen sink, famous kitchen sink engine. Here's the Ford Model B. That's pretty cool. You never hear about the Ford Model B, you know? Just so many other rare Fords. Look at this Model S. Room for mom and pop and a little extra seat for grandma. There we go. There's the Model A, the proper Model A that came later. Touring car version. Of course, Henry Ford's last innovation, the V8 Cabriolet. Woo! Oh. Now, I like air conditioning and power windows and power steering and good brakes and all of that stuff. But how did we go from these classy, stylish, beautiful, almost work of art like cars to stuff like this from when I was a kid? What's wrong with us? Or even worse, the Prius. Dude, this museum is just as bad as the Village. There's so much stuff packed into this gigantic place. There is no way to see it all today. Everything from early automobiles to streetcars and rail cars and full-on locomotives and trains. What in the Sam Hill? Even this replica of the 1829 Stephenson rocket and other very, very early ways of traveling by rail. Look at these carriages. That is incredible. Boy, look at the difference between those two. Insane! This is all still just in one wing of the museum, and I'm just showing you some highlights. I can hardly believe the stuff they've got in here. Look at this amazing old 1927 Bluebird bus. I rode a Bluebird bus to school, but it didn't look like that. This is already one of the best car museums I've ever been in, and technically, it's not even a car museum. There's also a good deal of aviation history packed into here, including a full-sized replica of the 1903 Wright Flyer. Imagine flying on that thing. It's basically made out of popsicle sticks canvas, and some wire. Unbelievable. So much stuff. I'm not as well versed in aviation history as roadside history, but that's the great thing about places like this. They always inspire you to learn more. Wow, dude, all they're missing in here is the Rocketeer. Hot seat, look at that. In the early days, Ford was fascinated by aviation as well. All right, now to flip over to the other side of the museum to see what I can see. Ooh, I like liberty. I like justice for all. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff, but I happen to know that this museum has an incredible piece of civil rights history somewhere in this place. But I guess before I get to it, look at all these George Washington artifacts. Wow, wasn't expecting all this. Oh, a neck collar for a human being. That is horrible. Leave it to mankind to bring the mood down with things like slavery. Here's all this information about Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. Of course, we just visited Gettysburg and spent quite a bit of time there. And here's something incredible. The chair from Ford's Theater that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in. That is unbelievable. I mean, think about it. This is the view John Wilkes Booth would have had from behind the chair. That is eerie. That is mind-blowing. Not the kind of thing you expect to see when you just pop around a corner. I'm not even in Lincoln mode right now. Oh, that's one of those things you see that doesn't sink in until later. What I was trying to see, I now realize is over this way. This is an incredible piece of history. And once in Montgomery, Alabama, we were playing a show. I walked across the street and found the exact spot where this all went down. This is the Montgomery City Bus on which Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. To double combo of Lincoln's chair, and then this instantly chokes me up. This is unbelievable and truly does belong in a museum, as Indiana Jones would say. There's a lot to cringe at in our collective American history, but also a lot to be proud of. Wow, it is so small in here, and yet such a huge piece of history. That's it right there. The actual seat. It's a nice seat. I wouldn't have wanted to get up either. And nobody should have had to, particularly not for such a stupid reason. It makes things like that so much more real. It makes you angry, you know? And that was only in the 1950s, which in historical terms is only 5 minutes ago. Was not expecting to cry today, but the Henry Ford got a little too real. Okay, the museum's closing soon. Reset. Maybe some American machines will cool me down. But boy, some of the stuff I've seen in here, like I said, it'll sink in fully later. It's a lot. It's heavy. It's heavy in here. Not just heavy machinery. See, I have never been mechanical. I've always been the more creative side of the arts and less the technical side. Not that there isn't a lot of creativity involved with the technical side. I mean, Henry Ford himself, along with, of course, his fabulous teams of engineers and designers, was a very creative guy. But yeah, I never got into machinery or pulling them apart. It's not interesting to me the same way the other stuff is. Oh my gosh, would you look at this? A Mold-A-Rama! Look at that! These are old vintage machines from the 1950s where you can actually make yourself a little plastic toy from a machine. It would injection mold a little plastic toy for you right in front of your eyes. Oh my gosh, it's been updated to take cards. I am absolutely Mold-A-Rama-ing myself one of those. Dude, look at that. It is now injecting it with hot plastic, which, when it cools sufficiently, will pop out of this machine right here. Ooh, look at that. There's even a warning on it for how to hold it. All right, here it comes. Ooh, that is warm. Not warm, hot. Check that out. I finally have my own Model T. Yikes, they had different safety standards back then. It's still so hot. Even Disneyland used to have Mold-A-Rama machines. And I don't even mean at the park. In other places, you could find Disneyland Mold-A-Rama machines and make yourself a little Disney toy back in the 50s. Gosh, there's so much going on with this place. If I lived anywhere near here, I'd be here all the time. I wouldn't be able to help it. There's so much to see and do and learn. Mayhaps likely if I'd have grown up with this kind of museum, I'd be able to read more good. There's this whole thing with kitchens throughout the years. It's like the kitchen-only version of Carousel of Progress. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow Whoa, look at that. That's a beautiful kitchen. Look at that tasty spread oleo margarine. Ooh, I'm butting up right against the limits of how much I can film in one day. I don't have enough film left for the camera. There's a lot more in here. Look at all these farm machines. I mean, farm machinery was a big deal to Ford and all the other early auto manufacturers because, of course, there were many more farms and farmers. We actually don't use nearly the same amount of farmland that we used to. Because of this stuff, we can grow so much more food per acre. Now, thanks to mechanized farming, we don't need as many farmers. Sadly, there were a few bumps along the way, the Dust Bowl and etc. But things are going pretty swimmingly nowadays. Okay, there's one more thing I want to see in this museum, and then I'll have to call it a day. One more thing I have absolutely desired to see forever. A certain vehicle I never have ever managed to catch up to. I've seen it going the opposite way on the freeway, but I've waited 39 years of my life to see up close an old classic Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. Would you look at the size of that wiener? Oh my gosh, it's gargantuan. It's not the biggest Wienermobile I've ever seen. The modern ones are way bigger. They're more like RVs, and the front of this one is barely taller than I am. But personally, I think this one is even better than the modern ones. This one is from 1952. I believe the Wienermobiles go all the way back to the 1930s. Can't remember if those ones were motorized or just parade floats, but anyway, the 50s was definitely the classic era of the Wienermobile. And most people don't know this about me, but I love a good wiener, because after all, who doesn't, particularly Oscar Mayer? So I am stoked to see this. I still really want to see the modern one, but I'm kind of loving the fact that it took this long, and the first Wienermobile I've got up close and personal with is a classic 1952 edition. Oh my gosh, from Rosa Parks' bus to the Wienermobile in under 5 minutes. From crying to laughing with wiener joy, just that fast. It's been a big day. I wish there was a Mold-A-Rama of that thing. Whoa, there's actually tons of Mold-A-Ramas in here. Look at, here's one of the Rosa Parks bus. I had to do it. Sort of a strange souvenir, but I'll take it. And they've got a 1965 Mustang, Abraham Lincoln's head, which has a huge bubble in it. I've heard of bobbleheads, but not bubbleheads. Oh, hot, Mr. Lincoln. I almost missed it, but supposedly there's also one for the Wienermobile. Ha ha ha! I found it. Oh my gosh, that is the hottest wiener ever. It's so hot. Now, according to the map, there's actually several others, including a Henry Ford one. But we all know the Wienermobile is the best one. You can't get any better than that. And so, I've got to wrap things up. There are so many more epic exhibits here. I mean, seriously cool ones, including a Disney costume exhibit. Here's Walt Disney actually at the Greenfield back in the day. This is the same exhibit, basically, more or less, that we saw a couple years ago at D23. And then there's this one, the Dymaxion House, the 1946 House of the Future. What a gorgeous place, huh? I don't know why that didn't catch on. I'd live in one. And among the millions of others we have no time to talk about, there's just one more that I'll quickly mention. A huge fleet of presidential vehicles. That's Ronald Reagan's Continental right there. John F. Kennedy's car. Later modified with a harder top and more bulletproof accessories to be safer for his successors, obviously. Dwight D. Eisenhower's bubble top Lincoln over here. Notice they're all Lincolns so far. What, did Ford ask for them back afterwards or something? And last but not least, FDR's 1939 Sunshine Special. The first car, I believe, ever expressly built for a president. And of course it had to be for FDR. It had to be super classy, because he was a man who knew his wheels. There is so much more that we didn't have time to really take a close look at. But not only have we now filled up all of the memory cards, the museum itself is now closing, apparently for some kind of special event. So we are now officially out of here. But if you liked this episode, please make sure that you are subscribed. You ring the weird little notification bell. Check down in the description. We've got Patreon if you want to support. We have sick merch, hats, and t-shirts at our online store. There are a lot of ways you can help keep the show on the road. Ooh, and I almost forgot, make sure to go and follow my Instagram at Justin Scarred, because we wanted to give back and do a sick giveaway coming up in the near future. Anyway, I am very happy to be out here on the road in America. What a great country, what a great museum, but we've done all we can do. So that means we've done our duty. We can go home and sleep Wow. That Mickey Mouse is ugly.